All right, I'm Phillip Roberts, and we're going to talk about insects and insect pest management for finishing this crop. First, I do want to stress the importance of hiring a scout. I didn't have this slide in this presentation originally, and Dr. Hand chastised me because I always say I show this at every meeting, so I continue that trend. But the only way you can make good decisions about insect pest management is to know what's in the field, okay? So make sure you hire a scout, hire a consultant. It was very important this year, as Dr. Hand talked to you about plant bugs a little bit, but make sure you hire a scout. Also, just wanted to remind you, if we look at insect pest management over time, you know, we in the state of Georgia, we've got some challenges and we still have to deal with pests. But I want to remind you that we really have a competitive advantage to a lot of other parts of the country. On average, we're spraying cotton somewhere around 3 times on average. Some cotton may be sprayed 0 or 1 time, some cotton sprayed 5 or 6, but depending on where you are in the state. But on average, we spray cotton about 3 times, and that's a really important point for us always to remember. And the ability to do that is all about making good decisions. Elimination of the boll weevil, utilization of BT cotton, it's really allowed us to be efficient with our insect pest management programs. Now, I do want to spend some time on plant bugs. And I know there are growers from various parts of the state, but I would say a high percentage of growers are more from the eastern side of the state. And plant bugs is a pest you've rarely, if ever, dealt with on this side of the state. But interestingly, every year we make estimates of infested acres and treated acres for specific pests in the state of Georgia. And following the 2021 year, I pulled data from all these previous years, and it's kind of a disturbing trend. If you look at infested acres represented by this blue line, we've been seeing a steady increase in the percentage of cotton in the state of Georgia where we see plant bugs. That has continued. You know, we're going to go up significantly, and a lot of reason we're going to go up is because you guys in this side of the state saw plant bugs this year. The other thing is treated acres. 2021, we had a pretty tough year with plant bugs, primarily in central Georgia, at Dooley County, Pulaski County, Bleckley County area, and in other counties west of I-75. This year, that area has expanded. We still don't know what percent of the acres were treated, but that's a disturbing trend. And one of the reasons why is we don't want to be disrupting our natural controls, our beneficial insects during the month of June, right? But I'm telling you, if you have a plant bug problem, you got to address it. So Dr. Hand showed you this image, and this was an extreme example. But this is what can happen. This is not what happened in a lot of parts of the state. But I can assure you, there are people that don't know they had a problem. And you've lost some positions in the bottom of that plant. So I'd encourage you as you go about that you just check on some of your crops and you look at this boll retention in the lower half of the plant, because as Dr. Hand mentioned, that may influence how you're using your growth regulators to make sure you know, we produce as good a crop as we can. Now, one of the things I'd also encourage you to do, if you call me or Dr. Hand or one of your county agent and you're out there in October looking at the crop, we can't come out there and tell you you had a plant bug problem. We can't do it. There's no way we can do a post-mortem and say plant bugs ate your bottom crop. We can't do that. Now, yes, we could be very suspicious that plant bugs took that bottom crop, but there's a lot of other things could happen. But plant bugs are relatively easy to scout for. We use drop cloths, we use sweep nets. You look at square retention. But one of the things you can do right now is plant bugs primarily feed on small squares. And when they feed on a small square, that square is going to abort. The plant is going to shed that position. Now, when these plant bugs were coming in June and the first part of July, these adult plant bugs were moving into cotton. They were also dumping eggs in plant tissues, okay? And something that many of you probably have never seen are these immature plant bugs. Well, immature plant bugs will tend to feed on a larger square, maybe a square which is half grown, all right? So if a plant bug, immature or nymph, feeds on a large square, often that plant will not shed that square. It's going to try to make that square into a harvestable bowl. And one of the things you will notice is something we term a dirty bloom, all right? A dirty bloom. That's where the anthers may have discoloration on them. You maybe see discoloration on the petals of the flower. But as you're walking your crop and you see dirty blooms, and again, we may have already cycled completely through plant bugs. But if you're seeing dirty blooms, we missed them, okay? We don't have a threshold on dirty blooms, but if you're seeing 10% dirty blooms, we missed them, okay? So that's something you can do right now. But hopefully we're over this trend. Another thing, we still have effective tools to control plant bugs. When we were spraying in June and early July, the two products primarily used were Transform and Centric. Both of those products are also active on aphids. So it made sense not to flare aphids when you're treating plant bugs. But as we move into bloom, we're more into stink bug mode, so to speak, and we should be killing plant bugs if they're there with our pyrethroids and Bidrin or whatever. But again, they were a problem. It's something I'm concerned about because we're having to, number one, spend more money, but number two, we're going to disrupt our beneficial insects, which we're not accustomed to doing in the month of June. Now, one example I'll show you is we've had a lot more calls about spider mites this year, okay? Part of it's environment. We got really hot and dry. But spider mites is just the cost of doing business for plant bugs, all right? We disrupt that crop and we have mites out there, we're going to see mite populations increase. A lot of instances where we have these most severe mite problems we're having to deal with, it's where we had to spray plant bugs. But again, you all know the importance of trying to conserve beneficial insects. But again, if you have plant bugs, you have to deal with that problem. All right, another thing when we disrupt and just sharing some information you need to be aware of is let's talk about BT cotton just for a few minutes. And this is a slide I put together several years ago, but I'm going to use it to make a couple points. But some of you remember 1996, we started planting Bollgard cotton. New Cotton 33B, New Cotton 35B. Y'all remember those varieties? Straight Bollgard. Now, over time, our industries have added a second gene, and in more recent years, they've added a third gene. And the reason they added those additional genes was twofold. Number one, they needed to improve efficacy against corn earworm, all right? When we had just straight Bollgard cotton, you sprayed corn earworms in single gene Bollgard cotton. You may not remember, but when we had straight Bollgard cotton, you sprayed soybean loopers in Bollgard cotton. You don't remember, but you sprayed fall armyworms in Bollgard cotton. So they added these genes to improve efficacy and broaden that spectrum of control of these other caterpillar pests. But probably most important was to help us with resistance management. And that's the point I want to get to. So if you look at these red bars, that's the original gene. They're all pretty closely related. We're several thousand-fold resistant. Corn earworm is several thousand-fold resistant to that very first gene. Okay, that's fine. Thank goodness we had the second gene. Thank goodness we had the third gene. The first gene is not functioning anymore. In parts of the country, the second gene is basically not effective anymore. I can tell you in Georgia it's breaking, all right? The industry has moved hard to 3 gene cottons, but there's still some Bollgard 2 varieties out there. You need to make sure your scout is looking at these Bollgard 2 varieties. I still feel very good about the Bollgard 3s, but the risk has changed in just the last couple of years in terms of the Bollgard 2s, because we're seeing the resistance increase rapidly to the second gene. So we're relying on that third gene. We're back almost to a 1 gene cotton again. Y'all follow me? Still very effective. So I've shown this slide and you've seen it before, but I've said this many times, it doesn't matter what BT cotton you're talking about, but it's not immune to corn earworms. It's not immune. We had a very unusual situation in July in 2022. This was a Bollgard 3 field that was loaded with corn earworms. 1 single field. We still don't know what happened. It was very troubling and concerning. I went to Terrell County about 5 times in 7 days looking at this field. We did what you would want us to do. We made sure we had these tested for resistance. Everything looks fine, but something went wrong in that 1 field. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. But the point I want to make is it's not immune. It doesn't matter if it's a Bollgard 3. Here's just a picture I got last week from a consultant up in Dooley County. And this is actually from a 2 gene field. But there's a corn earworm feeding on a square. Most of the time we see corn earworms feeding in blooms, right? When I saw a corn earworm feeding in a square, that's something different. In my mind, that tells me this guy is a lot more, he's not very susceptible to those 2 genes because he's eating in the top of the plant where expression of those genes is high. So it's concerning. But again, we haven't had to treat a lot of cotton for corn earworms, and let's hope we don't. But I'm just here to remind you, make sure you're keeping an eye on this stuff. And if we start seeing something unusual happening, across the state, your county agent's going to have information, and they're going to be giving you that information in a timely basis. But make sure you're keeping an eye, especially on your 2 gene BT cottons. And one final thing, this is like all bad news. But if we have a problem in a Bollgard 2 or a Bollgard 3 and we need to treat corn earworms, what are we going to treat them with? And our normal answer is spray them with a pyrethroid, right? That's what we've always done. We hadn't really sprayed much in a long time. But one of the things we do every year, and we've been doing this for a long time, is we just keep monitoring the susceptibility of corn earworms to pyrethroid insecticides. We do that by putting moths in a little glass vial at 2 different rates, and we see how they survive. The greater the survival, in theory, the more resistance they are to a product. And we started seeing really high survival back in 15. So we doubled the rate and started looking at a higher rate. But you can see in time, every year, they're getting harder and harder and harder to kill. Now, we hadn't sprayed a corn earworm with a pyrethroid in any crop, to my knowledge, in a long time. But I've got concern whether we're going to kill them if we target them with a pyrethroid. We're not going to pull pyrethroids out of the recommendations for corn earworm until we see a problem in the field. I mean, you would agree with that. You're going to go from a $3 treatment to a $15 treatment if we do that. But what I want to remind you of, we still got to have caterpillars at a 1/4 inch in length, but if you have a population that's real, just 8 or 10 per 100 plants, I probably would treat with a pyrethroid, see what would happen. But if we get in some oddball situation where we have a really big egg lay, I think you should consider making the switch. If you got 25 worms per 100 plants, I would consider going ahead and moving to one of these chlorotraniliprole products like a Vantacor, Besiege, Elevist, If that happens, and that's telling you how to finish this crop, if that happens, if you have high pressure, we need to consider using some of these more active compounds. And by all means, if you use a pyrethroid, make sure you come in there 3 or 4 days just to see if you got a kill. If you did not get a kill or you're concerned, get your county agent out there with you and go through what could have happened. But it's extremely important if we start seeing field failures, we can get that information out and we can make the appropriate change to a better insecticide spray. Stink bugs, you all know how to deal with stink bugs. I don't want to spend any time there. Make sure you're scouting. If you have a problem, deal with it. If you don't, let's just let it go. For some of our folks in Southwest Georgia, I just want to give you a brief update on whiteflies. You guys that follow us on whiteflies, you know we run these little yellow sticky cards where we're monitoring population of whiteflies. We primarily do that kind of in Tift, Worth, and Colquitt counties. One of the things I really want you to focus on is this green line. That is our captures of whiteflies on these sticky cards to date. That's really good. That green line is going to go up any day now. My assistant sent me data from yesterday. I expected it to go up yesterday. We check them every Monday, but it stayed low. But it's about to go up. But every week we buy is good news. We always want to get to August without seeing whiteflies in cotton. We hadn't done that. Last week we really started picking up really low numbers in several counties. So we're going to probably have to deal with whiteflies, particularly on anything planted in the latter part of May. Okay? In those areas where you historically treat whiteflies. If you're outside that core area, you're not going to deal with whiteflies this year. What can you do in those areas where you're going to be dealing with whiteflies? And really, there's not much we can do because how bad these whiteflies get is going to be weather driven. If it's hot and dry, they're coming. One of the things that's kept these numbers low in these areas where we run these traps, we've just had repetitive thunderstorms, and we have kept those populations beat down. But we've just recently gone through some hot, dry weather, and that's why I thought they were going to jump, but they didn't. But they're going to. But you can't control that, but you can scout your crop, and you can be timely. And folks in this room that's dealt with whiteflies, they understand the importance of timeliness when you're getting after whiteflies. That's true with all pests, but it's absolutely true with whiteflies. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is termination of insecticides. I get questions about this every year during September, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through our decisions or our thought process when we try to terminate control of a specific insect pest. The first thing you have to do as a grower or your scout, consultant, agent, whoever does this, is you've got to identify the boll, the last boll that will significantly contribute to yield. Okay? And you know what I'm talking about. The last boll that will significantly contribute to yield. Now there's two ways we do that. If you have cotton planted in May 1st, that plant loads up, cuts out hard. It's pretty easy to identify that last boll in the top of the plant you're going to harvest, right? Now the other way you do it, if you have late planted cotton, it's going to be weather-based. And Dr. Hand talked to you about weather-based. When is that last bloom you're going to pick? And based on what work's been done, it's somewhere between September 5th and September 15th. That's a big, wide range. But again, when we're terminating insecticide use, if you have a late maturing crop, you're going to have to make a decision. Okay? If you think you can make one on September 10th, we're going to use that to help make us our decision. And that's going to vary. If I'm in Jefferson County, it's probably not going to be the same as it is if I'm in Decatur County, right? But what we're going to do, we know through research that bolls are relatively safe from damage from insects once they accumulate a certain number of DD60s, once they develop to a certain maturity. And we know those numbers for each insect, basically. All right? Now, when we make that decision, I'm going to tell you when that is. But when you say, okay, we're stopping now, that field needs to be clean when you make that decision. Maybe you're making a decision on September 25th to quit spraying stink bugs in cotton. Well, it don't need to be full of stink bugs when you make that decision. You with me? Now, the specific insects. Corn earworms, you need to accumulate 350 DD60s from white bloom before it's relatively safe from economic yield loss. They can still get into some of these big bowls, but it's not going to be worth us trying to protect them. Stink bugs is much larger, a much longer time, about 450 DD60s. And on white flies, unfortunately, it's when every leaf on that plant's on the ground that you cannot worry about white flies, all right? Because you got to protect quality. Now, a lot of us, we don't calculate DD60s and this don't match perfect. But I like to communicate in days. And basically, for corn earworms, and we need to protect a boll that's about 25 days of age. And stink bugs, we use 25. Now, obviously, if it's October and the highs are 75 and the lows are 55, we're not accumulating a lot of DD60s, right? So it could be longer. But I still think these are two good numbers to go on. So one of the questions is, well, how do you know? If you go out there and look at that boll, how do you know if it's at this stage without doing all this other stuff? Well, a boll is fully sized, as big as it's going to get, when it's 18 to 20 days of age. So if a boll is fully sized, most likely you're safe from corn earworms. For stink bugs, it's fully sized, of course, because it's older, but you're not going to pop it in your hand. It's going to be very, very difficult. But those are shortcut methods to know when to terminate. If you say you're going to, and I personally think our crop is 10, maybe 14 days late across the state. So I think we're going to be pushing insect management throughout into the end of September for sure. I've seen fields treated the first week in October for stink bugs. I hope we have just this great fall, and I think most of you would like the opportunity to spray a stink bug on October 5th. You don't want to spend the money, but if you're still spraying on October 5th, we're looking like we're going to push this crop a long ways, in my opinion. But those are just some quick rules on when to terminate insecticides. And with that, I'll stop. I want to thank the commission for the opportunity. Thank you guys as growers for letting us work to hopefully help you. If you got any questions, I think I got 1 minute.